Okay, so here we're going to talk about wire types and how to strip and cut wire. So first of all, I want you to notice I have two kind of different sizes of wire here. This right here is a 12 gauge wire. This is what is in your house, 12 and 14 gauge. Pretty heavy, I guess pretty thick wire. And here you have a thinner wire. That's what we're going to be working with. This is 22 gauge wire. And I guess, so from what I understand, the naming, the numbering comes from the number of times that like the stretching process has been applied to the wire. And so 10 gauge is bigger than 22 gauge because the 22 gauge has been stretched more times. Okay, the other thing I want you to comment about is the difference between stranded and solid wire. This yellow wire is solid. There's a single core of wire running through it. Whereas with the stranded wire, there's multiple cores that are kind of wrapped together, and you can see them kind of spread apart. Okay, and so what you'll notice is that the stranded wire is a little bit kind of more flexible to work with. The solid wire is more stiff. It'll kind of retain that shape more. This one I can kind of bend it, and it'll kind of bounce back a little bit. And so the solid wire is a little easier to work with in that you have the single core, and it's easier to get to like push it through the hole in a circuit board and stuff like that. Whereas the stranded wire, if it gets kind of spread apart, it can be difficult to use. The solid wire also can conduct more current. You get a little bit of resistance with these different strands. Okay, and I guess the other trade-off is that the solid wire can be a little bit more fragile. So if you think about bending a paper clip a bunch of times, and eventually it'll snap. So because this is more rigid, it's more likely to snap than this one would be. Okay, so now let me walk through the different tools that we have. So we have a wire cutter, so we can cut the wire with this. So I'll cut some pieces that I'll later show you how to strip. So we can clip wires. Alright, I'll clip a couple pieces of wire. Okay, and so now we'll strip these pieces of wire. And the first tool I'm going to show you is this one. This is a kind of a typical wire stripper. Okay, you'll notice that there's numbers on the side for the different wire gauge. Since we're working with 22 gauge, we'll use that end one. This one's a little bit cheap and it's a little worn, and so it's not great, but it still gets the job done. The trick is that you just kind of put it in this spot. You're going to cut the insulation. You're just going to pull. Okay, and so I pulled the insulation off the end with that. I put it through this 22 gauge hole here because this is 22 gauge wire. Had to pull kind of hard, and if you're dealing with like small pieces of wire, you can potentially rip off the insulation on accident. Sometimes it's helpful to have like a pair of pliers to hold it while you pull that off. Okay, and there you go. Alright, the next kind of wire stripper I'm going to show you, this is an automatic wire stripper. This is a really cheap one. So if you're not careful, it'll just like shred the insulation instead of actually stripping it. So one thing I've noticed to get this to work is you kind of have to pinch down here while you pull it so that it applies enough pressure. Okay, and there you can see it stripped it. The downside to these is that they do cut into the wire itself a little bit and can make the wire a little bit weaker. So I pinch down, and there you see this time it was just stripping the insulation, so I'm going to rotate a little bit and try again, and there I got it this time. Okay, and the last kind I want to show you is this right here. This is a pretty nice wire stripper. You have, if you look at the end, different options for the sizes, and then this last hole says 18 and 20 gauge. It actually works for 22 gauge as well. And so what you do is you put this in that hole at the end, and then kind of squeeze it and pull, and you can see, there you go. Pretty simple. This is probably the easiest of them to use, and also the most expensive of those particular ones that I had to show. Okay, so there you have it, stripping wire. Okay, now that it's stripped, we can use it like to solder and stuff like that.